just want to start by saying that I have been drinking ayahuasca for 23 years. So I'm Brazilian. I was born and raised in Brazil. And I have both a foot in like the world of the Brazilian ayahuasca religions and mestizo and indigenous ayahuasca drinking. And back in the day, I met the shaman in Peru, and I really had a kind of like magical encounter with him, and it was super mystical, and I had a vision of him. He had a vision of me. Resulted that I invited him to go to Brazil, and I started to organize ceremonies for him. And I really enjoyed this guy, and he was a big teacher for me, and he was like a big reference. And I also got this kind of shortcut because I became his assistant. So from being like this foreigner that goes to Peru and, you know, is an outsider, I was sitting by him and feeling this great honor to be pouring ayahuasca or holding the flashlight when somebody has the ayahuasca poured. And we were cooking ayahuasca, and then we started to travel abroad, and I would go with him and sit on the ceremonies. And long story short, he married my best friend from childhood. I was the godmother of the wedding, and we had this big ayahuasca family. And so I started to plant some vines in my mountain house, and I built this place in the mountains to drink ayahuasca because I had like my work as a scholar, but I also, in fact, liked ayahuasca. That was why I went studying ayahuasca. And so I had this other life, which was my shamanic life. I had this phase that I kind of wanted to be a shaman, and a shaman wannabe phase. I think a lot of us go through that. I eventually gave up that phase and saw that my work was more, you know, on the diplomatic and the research front, on the politics of it. But I always had my ayahuasca practice, and so they were like my ayahuasca family, and we had wonderful experiences, very intense, and this wonderful chance to give ayahuasca to people and see people growing and healing and transforming. And he was always a kind of authoritarian guy, aggressive, but we sort of thought, well, he's just a Peruvian man. What can you do? He's like that. We took his aggressivity, but I kind of accepted because it was the price of having him as a teacher. But with time, we started to pick stories and collect information here and there. Ends up that he had a complete double life, and he was having sex with all these women and doing all these things that we didn't know. And so we confronted him, and he denied. And then we continued to confront him. And he finally, he packed his things. So they had a house together. They had a dog, car, everything. They were living together for 10 years. And he packed his things, and he fled to Puerto Rico and never came back. And so I was truly devastated. And I guess my way to integrate being devastated was to give a lecture about this topic, because after all, I'm an anthropologist and a researcher, so that's kind of how I get my, anxiety relief. And so I went to the WVC in 2012, and I gave a lecture about this topic where I tried to think a little bit about these issues that are systemic in the ayahuasca world. And they were very nice and accommodating, and they all clapped hard and gave me much love and much California, positive vibrations. And that kind of started a new phase for me. And then since then, I have had this, we have been helping women that are in that situation. So we have held innumerous circles of women that are, going through things, and they don't know what to do or how to get out, and finding out the problem and feeling the disillusion and feeling the backlash and just having that dream crashed and that ambiguity, is he my teacher or not, or what should I do? Should I tell others? And so this work is a continuation of something that happened in my private life. So it's not like, I want to be a researcher on sex abuse and ayahuasca. That happened to me. And then from this personal history and from helping other women and organizing each other, we started this work, and we have been doing this work. Just recently, I was 2 months in Brazil. We were holding several conversations because of a Santo Daime leader there that is accused of transgressing with several women, and this is continuing going in the US. I have also done things in Mexico. I lived in Mexico before. So that's my introduction on why we're doing this work. It comes from a lived experience. I also suffered a situation in ayahuasca ceremony that was very unpleasant, that also triggered me personally. And so this is, this work is part of the Ayahuasca Community Committee. That's a committee we have within Chacruna. So Chacruna wants to create public education and cultural legitimacy around psychedelic plant medicines and create a bridge between the world of shamanic, sacred, traditional drug use and the emergent field of psychedelic science or psychedelic-assisted therapy. I have been always an anthropologist talking to a medical and community and psychologists and try to do this kind of interface. And the Ayahuasca Community Committee is dedicated to trying to create best practices and support for the globalization and the paradoxes of ayahuasca expansion. And we have a few people that are based in Peru, and we are all kind of, the majority of us comes from the world of research, so we're also researchers that are also kind of tired of academia not being involved in the field and on the ground on taking solutions. So just a general, comments. Sexual abuse and misconduct towards female participants in ayahuasca circles are unfortunately quite prevalent. This includes, of course, a wide spectrum of abuse between healer and patient. So that can be invasive touching or consensual sex between the healer and participant, and rape. So when we're talking about sex abuse, we want to encompass a variety of things, like from the more radical to the more subtle. And that's part of the challenge. How do you define and where do you draw the lines? What is acceptable and what is not acceptable? And of course, this is not a problem only of ayahuasca cultures. It happens between different communities and contexts and can be compared to other things, like Rita mentioned, power inequalities or situations of patient and healer, or teacher and student, or So these were, for example, some of the questions that we tried to address. Why does sexual abuse occur in ayahuasca healing contexts? What are the issues with consensual sex between ayahuasca healer and participant? Is the globalization and commercialization of ayahuasca contributing to the occurrence of sexual harassment in ayahuasca communities? Is this a problem of ayahuasca globalization, or is this already happening in local communities? Or does it get worse in the context of the expansion? So this is part of a social media campaign that we did. We have around 30 blurbs that we have been launching online with some of these discussions. So the aims of the guidelines, as I said, we are people we are anthropologists that have been doing field work in the Amazon for a few decades, but we also want to have an interface with the psychedelic community and create situations of change, of raising awareness, of having impact on the ground, and creating community and making this dialogue between local contexts and international contexts. Just to explain a little bit, so everybody must have gotten this booklet in your bags. I also want to thank Breaking Convention for letting us put in there for free. This is a perk normally of the sponsors, but we didn't pay. They accepted our contribution. That's very nice. We consulted several victims or survivors of ayahuasca-related sexual abuse problems. We talked to a few indigenous women and mestizo women and women in the Amazon that are involved in this context of ayahuasca international retreats, but also just local communities. And we consulted several practitioners, and so we also talked to a few men and facilitators of rituals. And finally, we had conversations with academic experts and sexual abuse and professionals in the area. And as I said before, we also had as a background our own experiences in talking to women and holding circles and having this kind of conversations. So this is what we came up with, and I think I'm going to talk a little bit about what are the guidelines, but the real juicy questions, I think, are the challenges behind formulating this. So maybe I can talk about that in the panel, or if we have time in questions and answers. what were the kinds of challenges that we had in establishing those guidelines? Because I think the main problem is, it's a cross-cultural communication. I'll get in a little bit more in detail if I have time, but I just wanted to, pass through the guidelines quickly. So some of these things might look obvious, but I don't think they are so obvious, and well, maybe they are obvious after you write them anyway. So this is one point to start with. Consider drinking with friends. So when you're going to a retreat in a foreign country that you don't speak the language, try to go with somebody you know, or do your due diligence and do research to know who are the people where you're going to drink. And here I also want to give a shout out to the Women's Visionary Congress that accommodated my first lecture there. And that lecture created a lot of conversations, and the WVC did their safety guidelines and published them in 2014, their first version. So this work in many ways is legatory and in dialogue with their own pioneer work. I want to acknowledge that. Consider drinking with experienced women or couples. So a lot of women have made this choice that also, of course, abuse is just not men against women. It can be same sex, or it can be women against men. We're talking more generally, it's more often men towards women, but other situations exist as well. Some retreat centers have chose to work with female healers because this problem is so prevalent that some people just felt, that they would be better off with women, and other people prefer to have couples when there's a shaman that is a man and a woman. Check out the location and the healer. This is also related a little bit to what Brita said, like what about when there exists no community, and what about these itinerant shamans and you don't know who they are and where they come from, and how do you know if that person is trustworthy or not? So it's the same idea to try to find sources of checking if there is a community or is just a single person doing their solo flight. And now it starts to get more complicated. It is not necessary for healers to touch intimate parts of your body or any area to which you do not consent. So we have collected endless stories of women mentioning, for example, that the healers asked them to take their underpants off, or even the bra. For example, in Colombia, that is possible. Sometimes they will blow over your chest, but normally you keep your bra on. It's never common to just take your underwear off. So, some healers, if you tell them, I don't want to do that, they will say, well, that's bad for your healing, and you're going to get damaged. If you don't go the healing all the way, then that's dangerous for you. So you're under the influence, you're in a foreign country, you don't necessarily know that tradition, and, some women have gone through that. So we're putting these basic guidelines. No. It's not okay. It's not okay for you to take your underwear off or have been touched in ways that you feel uncomfortable. Bottom line, you have a right over your own body, and situations that you don't feel comfortable with, you are totally allowed to say no and to say, I don't want, and I don't accept to do that. So here is a continuation of this. Curaciones, sopladas, and limpiezas do not require you to remove your clothes. And of course, when we're saying that, we're not victim blaming and saying if a woman did that and she got raped, then it's her fault. This is about creating awareness and education about these traditions and how things happen on the ground, and about calling women's attentions to their power to say no. Look out for warning signs that a healer's intentions with you might be sexual. So this is also, there's endless stories. I think I was looking back retrospectively in this story that I told, I think I was naive product of that, because I was so flattered that I was his assistant that I started to accept a lot of things that made no sense. And when I look back, the first time that I drank together with my, still steamed in a way professor, we went together and had ayahuasca, and I was helping him, and I was his assistant. I had been drinking for 5 years. It was a great honor to be called to be assisting a healer. And then we took a taxi back home, and he was laying like that on me, and then I started to see his hand was going like this. And then I just was observing what he was doing with his hand, and then I felt that like he went a full circle around my breasts, and then I took his hand off and I put it away. So even if I look at this, like it was already in the seed of this guy's style, that kind of behavior. So at that moment I said no, but I never kind of connected that this might be a predatorial style that had been happening while I was promoting his sessions later on. So it's about, creating this attention, this awareness, permanent just being aware. It doesn't mean that you can't enjoy this, having your ayahuasca ceremonies, but it happened so many times in different ways to me and others that it's just something that we can't avoid talking about. Sexual intercourse between healer and patient during ceremonies or directly after the ceremonies is never acceptable in ayahuasca traditions. This is also tricky because one thing is like women and the other is the shamans themselves. So like just recently, another friend of mine that is a shaman, he went to a ceremony, and after the ceremony, he had sex with the woman the next day. And then everybody was upset with him. And he said, pero ella quería, she wanted it. And then we're trying to explain to him that it's not like that there is a power influential and differential, and that right afterwards is not okay. And doesn't even know her, not to talk about the fact that she can't even know exactly if she wanted it because it was still very close to the circle. But in his mind, that was okay. So I think this is like a sub-project of this one, which would be to like talk to healers and teach them some basics as well, not just the woman, but go to local communities and have this kind of dialogue. So Emily was in Peru just 2 months distributing the guidelines. She just returned, so we didn't incorporate this, but we want to publish some results and some reports on how this was received in Iquitos and in these retreat centers locally, and what were the kinds of answers that she got to that. Sexual intercourse with a healer does not give special power or energy. And here we're talking a little bit to a lot of women that reported they wanted to have sex with the shamans. And then, it's a basic message that sleeping with a shaman doesn't make you a shaman. And it's true that a lot of women do hit on men or feel, a sexual kind of energy. We also had some indigenous women being really angry about this because they say this, Americans and Europeans come here, they started to swim naked in the river and, walk around like loving Mother Earth, but they don't understand that here we have different rules and it's not like that. And our men are going with this woman and then they leave and there's a problem that stays here with us. So this is the challenge of this cross-cultural context and communication. We were accused by some people when we launched the guidelines very intensely that we were, victim blaming or telling women what they could or could not do. And we're just, calling the attention to the fact that you can't be ethnocentric and think that all the cultures think like you and act like you. That if you wear certain clothes or do certain things, that might be interpreted in certain ways. So we're not saying don't do that, but we're saying be aware of that. Be aware of the way you dress, be aware of the way you interact, touch, look, dress. All those things might be interpreted in certain ways. So this talks to the next 2 points. Consider cultural differences and local behaviors norms when interacting with native healers. And consider cultural differences and local clothing costumes. Protect your personal space, physically and spiritually, before, during, and after ceremony. Be wary of healers who offer psychoactive substances and others than those used during ceremonies. So that's also a long story. The Daime leaders that we saw abusing, they also had special rituals with MDMA or LSD or some other shamans will create special rituals with other substances, and this kind of thing has been a frequent trick to have situations where they are alone with women or trying explicitly to seduce women. He's a shaman, not a saint. That would be the same thing for a woman. I think also Brita spoke of this point, which is romanticization of indigenous healers. I do want to talk to you, Brita, about this idea of you are your own healer versus there is healers that are healers really, and not everybody's own healer. I think that's a very challenging situation. For us from the ayahuasca world, that's a little bit, no, not everybody's a healer. He's a real healer. I know what you're getting at, but I think we could talk more about in the questions and answers. I also want to just say that Brita published a wonderful article in Chacruna about this, and I did not agree totally to this point that everybody's a healer, but I published it regardless because I think the whole argument is really important. So you can go in Chacruna.net and go under Chacruna Chronicles and Sex and Power, and you'll find Brita's article over there. If a violation occurs, get support. This has a lot to do with people getting, also I said here, being ashamed of being, dirty or embarrassed with what happened and having a hard time in expressing that and looking for help, and sometimes not finding help in their communities. Be aware of what might appear to be consensual sex. And this is also kind of delicate because there is this rule in some ayahuasca traditions that you can't have sex before or after, but some couples report having sex. So there was a huge, like when we're trying to put this paragraph together, there's like blood, sweat, and tears because some people feel strongly that they should be entitled to have sex with their partners after ayahuasca. And then it's like, but what if you've never had ayahuasca? What if you don't know that person? What if you're new to the substance? So there is a spectrum of things, but in general, we do feel comfortable with certain limits, and this idea of consensual that should be problematized. And be aware of getting romantically involved. And then again, this is not special to ayahuasca. The same for any vacation. You're just meeting somebody, like, are you sure? And, trying to create this culture of accountability and of group. So if you're aware of witness sexual abuse, speak up. So we have, made these guidelines. They are available in 5 languages. They are downloadable for free in our site. We have moved to creating a legal resources companion. So that's a resource to, like if you have problems, which kind of nonprofits or support you can get in each country, and also your legal rights. So we're trying to cover all the countries that have, that are in the Amazon or that are the main tourism spots, but also Mexico and Costa Rica, which are frequent ayahuasca destinations. So here is our site. I recommend you all register to our newsletter. So chacruna.net, if you go on top, is sign up for your newsletter. We are also completely self-funded nonprofit. We don't have any really institutional funding, and so we have been publishing an online magazine with hot topics on the field. It's called the Chacruna Chronicles. I invite you all to visit it. We have this session, Sex, Power, and Psychedelics. We have another one called Inclusion and Diversity. We have another one called Queers, and then just, a series of articles on culture and policy. We're trying basically to give visibility to create this public education and this bridge between traditional use and contemporary use, but also to include other voices in the field of psychedelic science. So we're trying to create spaces for people of color, for queer people, for women, for people from the global south, from other kinds of knowledge that is not just biomedical knowledge, from anthropology, from social sciences. And so if you like this work and you feel compelled, we also accept volunteers. I want to give a final plug to our next conference. It's called Psychedelic Liberty Summit. It's going to be in April in 2020 in San Francisco, where we're uniting different decriminalization initiatives through the states, and also discussions on the advancement of FDA regulation for psilocybin and and MDMA, and bringing the topic of peyote conservation into discussions of legalization, because it's probably the most neglected topic in the field of psychedelics in the US is peyote and conservation. So I welcome you to come and join, and we also have a big archives. All our conferences are filmed. They are on YouTube, and they are available for free. And we have been creating some audio materials. If you want to somehow support our work, I'm here, Emily and Clancy as well. We have a table downstairs. And thank you for the organizers, and thank you for listening.